From the earliest time I can remember, I've wanted to be a painter. I haven't found it easy or predictable. I never did make it to art school. I've also been sick 4 times, but I've managed to have a very rich and joyous life exploring and painting in areas of the world that interest me. I've also been able to make a living, which is some sort of success, and the craving to learn more has never left me. That's why the notion of documenting the creation of a specific painting of mine has intrigued me and become a learning process in itself. I'm going to begin outdoors in summer, and then in winter I'll go through the monotyping process of the same motif, and I'll finally finish it in my studio. I think this sounds like one more adventure for me.
I'm as dependent on the weather as a farmer. I'm going to be facing that way, I think, to draw it. Yeah. It's quite a challenge to put water in the middle of a composition, I think. That's what I've found so attractive, is the challenge of making a huge body of water as interesting as the braided sandbars.
To prepare for this large canvas, I painted a great many smaller studies of the site, and I brought the best one with me today for reference.
I really have to think like the river thinks. I want to see the big moves in the charcoal before I go to the color, because I get so enchanted with color, I forget. But my aim is to keep trying to get the geometry on the surface that also reads as geometry in depth.
Painting is like humming a tune to me. I have 63 colors on this palette because I want immediate access to the color note that has occurred to me. Cezanne, had 73 paints on his palette, and that was probably his most efficient means of responding to a color idea. I think it's fine, and I don't think it's just laziness on my part.
Every mark that gets the next, if I just trust process, I'm going to get it passionately right, as opposed to mechanically right. I'm not pretending to get the color right today. I just want to get color events rolling so that I can pick them up later. So my objective today is just to touch every area that's going to count. If I maintain the geometry on the surface with these patches a long time, then I'm pretty much assured of preserving the original impression. And I always trust the original impression more than I do the belabored one. I remember being 5 years old and getting a brand new pair of red tennis shoes for my birthday, and I was at the seashore for my birthday. It was June 30th, and I walked out onto the beach at dusk, and the red of the tennis shoes actually hurt my eyes in the dusk, because the sand, which is very white in Virginia, had turned purple, and the contrast between that glowy purple and the glowy new tennis shoes excited me a lot. And I went back and I told my grandmother that I wanted, this was from her. I remember seeing the tennis shoes, but she told me once that I came back and said that I wanted to make that hurt behind my eyes and not have to wait for dusk. So she gave me a paint set, and I was on my way.
I grew up in a house full of people after World War II, two sets of aunts and uncles, and one set of grandparents on my mother's side.
It was a world of 8 adults, and all of them with a different opinion about what I should be doing.
But there was a caretaker living with us named Mina, who was the daughter of a former slave who adored me. She could sum up the mechanics of my family by very few words indeed. I remember a spectacular summary of the situation at home. She said, "Your mama don't like you, but she wear you like a hat."
The emphasis was on hastening maturity. The tradition was Virginia failing gentility. I can't wait till my sister sees this. But the idea was educate myself a little bit in every department so that I'm well-rounded, but for heaven's sake, don't focus. And catch a good man, blah, blah, blah. Well, I didn't marry till I was 42, and I was the despair. I was the lost cause of that environment. But in terms of how it influenced my work, it was a fabulous place to grow up. Woods and creeks and animals everywhere, and my grandfather was especially connected to animals and farming, and although he was a calligrapher, I don't think he was exactly an artist. He was just very happy with handmade things, and he was part Cherokee and connected to living things in a very important way that was very strong for me. He worshipped trees. He really was kind of a pantheist, and my first experience of landscape was therefore guided by this enlightened, rather careful, silent man. I had a good mimic's talent. I could sit down and draw a face that had absolutely no bones in it, but it looked like somebody. I don't know if that's talent. What I did have was the energy and the commitment. I knew that this is what I wanted to do from very early age. I can't remember not wanting to do what I do. I was not encouraged at all, except in a very secret way. And so I knew I had to get a career, some kind of academic gravy train to get out of Virginia. And so I settled on art history, and then I got myself some undergraduate and graduate scholarships and got out of Virginia straight into New York and started working then. It worked for about a decade, and I made enough money to do night classes at the National Academy or the New York Academy or Art Students League. I went to all of those places for whatever I needed. And I needed a lot because I did not get formal training at Smith. It's only through memory that I've been able to sort of repatriate all of this information, all these sense impressions. So it's a wonderful deep well of imagery, of mental furniture. If I can just learn to lower my bucket lower and lower and lower and deeper and deeper. It's a constant battle to stay encouraged on the second day. Gotta juggle with today's mood and today's decisions on yesterday's stone rubric. So, ain't always easy. Nothing is easy about what I do, but it's very joyful. So now what I'm going to do is just flit around the surface, trying to pay as equal attention as I can to every quadrant of the surface. Well, first of all, I stalk the subject of a painting, or it stalks me, and I'm very aware that I'm suddenly grabbed at a certain point where the structure is very compelling to me. Then I take it indoors into the studio, and under controlled lighting, and a good 45 feet away from it, I can reaffirm the structure that entered my brain in the first place. When I work outdoors in the open, I'm guaranteed absolute concentration in a field. I can't explain it, but in a studio I get self-conscious, and I feel like sometimes the voices of all my heroes are telling me what to do. Tomorrow will be like play, because I will have, I hope, solved some of this. If I can make the colors vibrate, remember that story I told you, little red tennis shoes in a purple dusk. I've been brave in these 3 days because of the sense of pressure. And I want that same pressure again, indoors, in the middle of winter. To loosen myself up, to get brave, as it were, I try and go monotype from a painting before I finish it. And I think I'll do that with this. It's very good for me to reduce before I go back and try and finish. I'm grateful I discovered monotype in time to adapt it as a corrective of compositional ideas that aren't quite complete. See, this is too precious right now, but eventually it'll get rough and tough again. Illness changed everything 4 times. To talk to those 4 changes, I'm going to have to dig really deeply into memories that, for defense purposes, are probably very foggy around each incident. But I can tell you that each time I was ill, I was more and more confirmed, galvanized, really riveted to what I wanted more than anything else, which was to be a good painter. Certainly after each bout, when I was able to get on my feet again and work, I was braver than I was before. I mean, I was an abstract painter until I was 24. And then, of course, what does a 24-year-old have in terms of pith, stuff to talk about, paint about, whatever. But at 25, I did have something to talk about, and I could no longer do it in an abstract language. It was as if I had to split off, rather artificially, some part of me that I knew I could recapture, trace later. But that first, it was very important that I stuck with the real world, the natural world, nothing abstract, nothing too far out. The first attempts at this sort of rehabilitation led me to 10 years of painting doors, windows, walls. I found myself spending winters in Haiti, winters in Venice, so that I could paint just the abandoned palazzo or the chairs on an abandoned Haitian lean-to. It was a very strange time, but I knew I was gathering nuts like a squirrel. I knew I was getting somewhere because I saw at once that the geometry of such things, these subjects, was riveting to me, and I wanted to pursue that very, very much. The last painting I did of a door was in Florence, and the sun had crept down to meet the door's sill. So they were always structures, scaffolds of marks in that phase of my work. I hiked in Peru in 1979 for 50 days, and in the Altiplano, I found a moonscape, which was so entirely different from green trees and grass and all of that, that I just went berserk. I did about 120 watercolors, none of which I have. I have 5 maybe, but they were all stolen in Lima. Very sad, but it's just as well too, because the memory of them is very sweet. So I came back from Peru and I started painting landscape. It was that easy. Finally, in '88, I had married, moved west, given up my job, worked a month with Richard Diebenkorn, and then was very sick. And I remember getting up about April 8th or so and going to Chatfield Reservoir, which is just near here, and painting the best painting I had ever painted in my life. What it was a burnt meadow with water in the front, a raw, rainy April, very cold, and I did it in 6 or 7 hours. The rain and the clouds made a steady light, and there was this black, jagged horizontal through the whole thing, and then these tender greens and pinks, and the water itself was a muddy green, and the mountains were very blue, and there was a hatch, a streak, a scar of white marble from a quarry, and it was very brave painting to do, I think. I still do. With this latest thing, in '99, I started doing truck yards and junk yards, and these funny, blousy 50s Mack trucks in a junkyard very near here. It's a lineup of blue trucks, and then about the 10th truck, it becomes a yellow truck with the smokestack, and then there are 2 more blue trucks.
Because illness sharpens your focus so much and makes you crave the next step, that next epoch, as it were, you have to be more honest. And the more compassionate you are about yourself, about your past flaws, about weaknesses, and you begin to incorporate it and celebrate it.
Monotype forces me to reduce to the absolute irreducible gesture a lot of detail that I end up doing in painting. It's gooey, it's fun, it's urgent. I'm hobbled by the reduced materials with which I can make a monotype, and this is very good. If it's a different scale from the painting I'm working for, and it always is, I never do a monotype the same size as a painting, then I can go back to a painting that hasn't been finished and really understand what I was originally attracted to in the first place in the motif. And I can get at it better, the simplicity of the motif. So there's a huge difference between necessity and embellishment. And what monotype tends to do is reduce my reliance on embellishment, which is what I did as a young painter. What I'm doing now is uncovering the personal geometry that fascinates me so much and turned me onto this subject in the first place. Remove myself once, twice, thrice from the natural form which provoked this painting.
It's best to use very good handmade paper of deep leathery thickness and then soak it in water. When the painting process is over on the lucite or copper plate, we place the damp paper on top of the image and roll it through a press weighing about 1,000 pounds to fetch it on the other side in its reverse form.
Well, I'm glad I tried it, though. I mean, none of this is wasted. Accumulated things that'll percolate and And I'll bring that to the painting, that's the whole point. These are not monotypes with their own, they're means to an end, not the end itself. I'm self-made, and it makes me self-conscious in some ways and very glad in others.
The most enduring influences on me have been Cézanne as a child and teenager, and then Kandinsky, 20s to 30s. And then in 1986, I worked with Richard Diebenkorn for just a month, but every day, twice a day. At that point, I completely changed because he pointed out to me that the skin and high finish of a painting wasn't as important as the bones of that painting.
When he came to the Institute of Santa Fe, it was the most important moment of my life, and I've always had this wonderful feeling it was destined because I overheard that he was coming to the Institute in a booth in a luncheonette, and I called the Institute like that, and I got myself into this group of 8, and they were all much younger than I. Oh, God, he was so good with the fright in all of us. And he always talked about bones and skin, and he thought that I paid too much attention to the virtuosity, facility of my hand, that I could finish something very easily, and that it really wasn't the point. The point was to just be as true and authentic to whatever I had to say as I could be. It was very good for me. But anyway, on the next to last day of this very intense month, I said I was claustrophobic and I just had to get out and paint a landscape. So he said, well, do it big. And he let me go. Then I did a 7-foot painting in 9 hours. I didn't consider it finished, but I took it back. And he said, this is good. Turn this to the wall for a year. Don't look at it. Don't touch it again. And in the end, you will have gleaned from my teaching all I can offer you. And of course, I didn't know what he meant. But a year later, I did. And I still have the painting in my bedroom. He depended on me to grow. But I couldn't grow if I wanted to go back and fix everything and make it right. When I moved west in 85, 86, I had already acquired a lot of habits of hand. And so when I saw the absolute light and the absolute dark of the mountains and the plains here, I became more of a sculptor with color. And nothing shared edges here. Everything shares edges in the East. And so it was a totally new experience for me. The West was exotic at that point, and I set to work to grapple with the forms I saw as best I could. I had to understand the scale of the West, first of all. And I began to discover that it was in the corners of grand views that I found the most relevant material for what I wanted. If I'm doing something I'm certainly good at, I'm bored stiff. And Diebenkorn was wise enough to point out that boredom was around the corner if I simply stopped at facility. I mean, I think every artist knows this on some level. If you're showing off, you're not getting anywhere. I find that one mark begets another, and that the best way to repatriate this artificially split off abstract side of my earlier work is to pretend that the surface is a mosaic. I see colors in such a vibratory mode, in such a high contrast. And so to get that high contrast is a goal that has nothing to do with where the subject is going to lead me or how much the place I'm working in is going to be accurately conveyed as topography. I'm not interested in topography anymore, and I think that's freedom. I mean, in other words, it doesn't matter where I paint. It will, if I'm attentive and true, be a process which will be unlike any other.
I've just been jamming on this because I'm getting now that sense of deep flat, that sort of sled ride into distance. And I'm seeing that these strokes can be piled on each other over and over and over and over and over again. thing that's really interesting is while I was working on this, I was looking between the big one and the drawing, because the drawing seems to distill what I learned in these monotypes. And now I'm going to look to the painting and the drawing for this. I find that if I switch back and forth from version to version, I'm going to bring all of these ideas together, if I'm lucky. So it's trying to work from my own mental furniture rather than nature.
First of all, the word finish wasn't really going to be my goal. What was going to be my goal was to get back to the thing that resonated most strongly with me, which was a composition which I recognized and had to stop in that place to capture. So what I was basically doing was trying to get back to what you saw on the first day, 2 days, where I was brave with the big strokes and the big diagonals and orthogonals, and the depth was so easily come to, so easily carved out and yet linked with the foreground. I depend 100% on my memory and on the triggers to that memory. But sometimes, I guess, winter obliterates some of that sensory impression that was so important to begin with. I would have never thought I would forget the rocks and how they were this pearly red underneath the blue. And the blue was only reflected sky, but I did. I forgot it. So I had to rethink the drawing. This little drawing, this big, got me back on track. And then the monotype, the very last monotype I did, was the biggest and the most complex. That helped a lot.
I mean, this blue is going to change millions of times before I get it right. But I just wanted to try it lighter, as it would be in the morning. In other words, you can't be exact. You have to make a painting. The thing I could do in the monotype that I can't do in the painting, unless I spend days at it, is layer the water. The rocks are underneath, and I haven't begun to describe that. The whole thing is water, land, air, hot summer. Retail water. I think for the moment I've got good bones, and now it's not that I want skin on the bones, it's that I want these juxtapositions to be magical.
I must have had 30 solo shows in 35, 40 years. And they've all been scary, but this one has not been scary. One room of 3 years history can teach you a lot if you're willing and eager to learn, change, grow, develop, risk. Wherever I set my easel, any square foot on any hemisphere, on any continent, I'm finally able to reach down into the unconscious and bring up whatever I need to say about what I'm looking at. And that the resonance of whatever I'm looking at is very specifically chosen by an intuition which I trust now more than I ever did. So I would say I'm a traveler who no longer probably has to go so far-flung to find an honest, true way of painting.